Hola a todos and welcome back to the Bruja Cat channel. Stormy's being really clingy again.
Woo! Wow. Say hi, kitty.
So as you can see, I had a little bit of a furniture change. That's why you can see my boveda and my mesa espiritual now. But this just kind of helps me to organize all my stuff to make sure it's in one place. I'll go more in depth about Latin American altars, mesas, and all sorts of stuff like that in future videos. So today is part 3 in a video series about the origins and influences of Brujería and espiritismo in Latin America. So in this video, we're going to be talking about the indigenous perspective. In my previous 2 videos in the series, I talked about the Spanish influence and the African or Afro-Latinx influence. So if you haven't checked those out, make sure you watch those first before continuing on in this video. I will have the links to those videos in the description below. So the first thing to understand is that the indigenous people of the Americas, so this means North America, Mesoamerica, and South America, are not a monolith. These are hundreds of tribes that have lived here for thousands of years before any Europeans, before any Africans came to the Americas. So these were sovereign nations, they had warring tribes, they had entire cultures, entire languages of their own. And unfortunately, in this video series, I'm not going to be able to discuss all of them, so I will talk about the ones that I'm most familiar with. So in Brujería and espiritismo in Latin America, there's a lot of practices that come from Mesoamerica. So this means the area between Mexico and Panama. And even within this region, you still had hundreds of tribes, of which the most popular, I think, are the Aztec, the Olmec, and the Maya. So one thing that I do want to note is that on my channel, I use the term brujería very loosely as an umbrella term for all sorts of root work or conjure. However, these native indigenous people used these as a sort of medicine for root work. So these would be things that would heal you physically and also spiritually. So many people within Latin America see brujería as only conjuring for baneful magic. That's why I try to use it in my videos as a general umbrella term for all sorts of different practices, whether they be conjure or whether they be root work. So this is sort of like a reclaiming of this term for our modern day practices. And that's a topic for another video that I'll do about the nuances of these different terms as well. So in Mesoamerica and overall in Latin America, there are different practitioners that use root work, that use holistic medicine in order to heal. So these can be known as curanderos, hierberos, sobradores, parteras, all sorts of different practitioners. So within the general mindset of the public, a lot of people know these healers as shamans or medicine men. However, this is misinformed, and we want to sort of cut that stereotype and use terms that are more appropriate and that are more accurate to their spiritual practices. So within Latin America, the term shaman or chaman is more loosely used or loosely defined. So again, this depends on the individual and how they identify themselves. So depending on the spiritual practice within all of Latin America, there's all sorts of different terms. There's a plethora of different vocabulary that you can use to describe these sort of practitioners. And also depending on the tribe that you come from, they have different names for these medicine healers as well. So for the purposes of simplifying this for this video, I will call them curanderos. So curanderos have highly influenced brujería and espiritismo in Latin America. I've talked about this very extensively in my series about limpiezas, which I will also link below in the description. So the origins of these limpiezas and how these practices came about are actually from the indigenous influence. So using tobacco, using palo santo, different sorts of incense, these sacred trees that we have, all these different ideas come from the indigenous community. So from Mesoamerica, the Aztec, the Maya, the Olmec, a lot of their spiritual practices and their civilizations have sort of been turned into a spectacle by Hollywood in movies and TV. One example of this misrepresentation can be seen in the movie Apocalypto, where the civilization is sort of half represented, half not, where these people aren't exactly being portrayed in the correct light and not being shown their correct practices, along with a plethora of misinformed historical reference. Overall, their timeline is just wrong and the representation is wrong. So another thing that Hollywood gets wrong is the concept of blood rituals, blood sacrifice, and human sacrifice that is found in these Mesoamerican civilizations. So the term bloodletting is different from blood sacrifice. So in a blood sacrifice, it's something that is supposed to weaken something to the point of death. This can involve animal sacrifice, for example, or human sacrifice. Now, bloodletting is completely different. This can be done as a small incision. It was done as piercings, for example. These were not things that were meant to harm people, but as a form of bloodletting to allow this blood to flow for their deities, for their spiritual practices. So a lot of these shamans or curanderos, they were aware of the dangers of infection, and these cuts or these piercings were done in a safe manner. This is another misconception and stereotype that we need to let go of, is that these civilizations were primitive people, that they were primitive natives in the jungle, but in fact, the Maya, the Aztec, the Olmec were empires. These were very advanced civilizations in their time. So these medicine healers, they were their doctors, their physicians of the time. These were very knowledgeable people in the civilization. They were very knowledgeable of the different herbs, tea, of roots, all sorts of things, not only to heal the spiritual cleansing and stuff like that in order to get rid of maldades, but also for physical healing. And so this is how you get practitioners, how this developed for hueseros and for parteras, for sobadores. All these different sort of practitioners came from their indigenous roots. It should also be noted that in Mesoamerica, in these civilizations, they had astronomers, they had astrologers, they had mathematicians. So one example that we can see in this is the arithmetic that these different Mesoamerican cultures developed, and the different Maya calendars, the different Aztec calendars as well. So one book recommendation and one reference that I have are Cleansing Rites of Curanderismo. In this book, they give all sorts of different illustrations and graphics. So here they illustrate and give the names of the 18 months and the 28 days in the Mayan calendar. This book also describes how obsidian and pyrite were used in that civilization in order to make mirrors. It also goes into various details about how to perform a plática, how to do different limpiezas, especially fire limpiezas. There's also examples of the Mexican calendar as well, and all sorts of fantastic historical illustrations. There's examples of etchings, different sculptures, and these are references to historically doing fire limpiezas, water divination, barridas. It also discusses how to properly do huevo limpiezas, all sorts of different things. Also within these Mesoamerican cultures, they had their own form of divination using maize or corn kernels called boleomancia. So depending on the practitioner, they can differ in their techniques. However, I've seen different examples of boleomancia where they will throw maize as a form of lithomancy, and they'll read the kernels according to how they land. So it all depends on the practitioner. I've seen examples where they use the Maya, the Mexican, the Aztec calendars as a form of divination, including astrology as well. So it all depends on the sort of divination that you're trying to do too. One curandero that I highly suggest is Bohio on TikTok. So if you are someone from Mesoamerica, someone that is very interested in curanderismo, he is an excellent source of knowledge. I will link his social media in the description as well. Now, another aspect that has translated from the indigenous culture to the mainstream Latin American culture are cryptids, legends, monsters, ghosts, all sorts of things like that, which I will cover in another video series in the future. So one thing that has endured from these indigenous cultures, from these different Native American communities, are their different creation stories, and they all differ depending on the tribe that you come from. However, in my research, I find it very interesting that all these different sort of themes are interwoven within different indigenous tribes. So ideas like the serpent, Quetzalcoatl, can also be found in the Taíno mythology as well. However, within the Taíno pantheon, they're known under different names as Iguanaboina or Mautiatihuel. And yes, I have heard all of your comments. I will talk about the Taíno pantheon, espiritismo, and all their semi. I will explain all of their legends in my future videos. I will do it, I promise you. Now, another theme that can be found within these indigenous creation myths is that of the underworld. So I can see the correlation between the Christian idea of hell and different cultures' interpretation of an underworld. However, these are two completely different concepts, so try not to correlate the different similarities that you may see. So within the indigenous culture, they all have their different names, they have different ideas of the underworld. It may be an other world. Many different practices may believe in reincarnation as well, so they can see life in a cycle, in a circle. It all depends on the different tribe that you're from. So it's really fascinating researching all these different indigenous practices, all these different indigenous creation myths and their legends, all their stories. These are passed down through oral traditions. So look into who are the tribes people in your local area and see if there are any resources for you, if you can talk to an elder maybe, and that way you can continue on in that oral tradition. And also, depending on the indigenous tribe that you come from, there may not be different resources about your culture, about your heritage. So due to colonization, a lot of these documents, a lot of the sculptures, a lot of these different things have been destroyed, and there just simply is not resources, there's not documentation about it. So I think there is something inherently important about oral tradition and passing down knowledge from elders to the new generation as well. And I also applaud any indigenous teachers out there that are keeping their language alive. Any elders that are native speakers of their indigenous language, make sure that you are passing on these different words, these different terms, ideas. Language is also inherently a they help for neuroplasticity as well. So these different concepts that can be found within our language can also be preserved through our speech and through our words as well. And also keep in mind that a lot of these indigenous tribes did not have a written language at all. This was just passed down through oral tradition. So archaeologists, anthropologists have created different languages in order for you to write it down. However, this was just not the case. Before Europeans came to the New World, they didn't really write things down. It was more illustrative. For example, you would have carvings or petroglyphs, and that would tell the story of their people. So hopefully in the future we can do different steps to preserve languages. I know that there are different books out there that are trying to preserve Taíno language, just because I'm from the Caribbean and that's something that interests me. So if you're also from the Caribbean, you can get this book Voces de Bohio, which is basically a dictionary translating the words of the Taíno people into Spanish. Now keep in mind that this is a language that did not have its own alphabet or grammatical structure, so it's actually borrowing some grammatical structure and spelling from Spanish. Now I know that a lot of indigenous tribes have ideas about spirits that exist in the world, that different sort of inanimate objects like trees, landscapes, different rivers have spirits of their own as well. And this is a different theme that translates, that is integrated into all different sorts of tribes throughout all of the Americas. So while some may revere this as a form of animism, different people may revere this as different workings of nature, such as physics, that simply has not been explained yet. So what are some tools that are used in the indigenous community that we can see in Latin American Brujería and espiritismo? Well, for one, I've talked about the use of tobacco, of palo santo, of sage, hierba santa, stuff like that. These are not only sacred plants or trees, it's also used as a form of offering. So not only is it used as incense for spiritual cleansing, these can be used as offerings, and there's a sacred importance to this plant, to this herb, to this tree as well. And the importance of tobacco is seen throughout all sorts of indigenous tribes in the Americas, but it all differs according to each tribe, how they will use that tobacco, if they will use it for smudging, if they will use it just for offering, laying tobacco, for example. But it is a reoccurring theme in these different tribes. And as a disclaimer, I have talked about it in my previous videos about holistic and ethical marketing of white sage, palo santo, and these different herbs that are used for spiritual smudgings or cleanses. So just make sure that wherever you get them from is not benefiting from unethical marketing of these products. And in fact, you can go to your local tribe's health center and ask for medicine as well. So these different smudges, these different spiritual cleanses, smoke cleanses can be done in all sorts of different ways. There are practitioners that use tobacco from cigars in order to cleanse people. There are practitioners that use abalone shells in order to smudge people using sage. There are practitioners that use palo santo instead of oyster shells. It all depends on the tribe that you come from the culture, all sorts of different things. That all depends on the individual practitioner. I know that in Latin America, different barridas are very popular, so in a previous video I talked about this in the form of sweeping, like for a broom. However, these barridas can also be done through herbs, through plants, and they can be done as a sort of sweeping of your area and also sweeping of the person as well. Different families also will have an ofrenda on the daily in their family home. So a corner or a small table will have a little mesa that will be an ofrenda for their ancestors, and they will venerate them. This is not a form of worship, but is simply a form of ancestral veneration. So in many ways, it's just honoring those that came before you, like honoring your elder, honoring your mentor. And in fact, some of the vocabulary from the indigenous languages have influenced Spanish as well. So in Puerto Rican Spanish particularly, there are different words that we use in our speech that is not found anywhere else in Spanish-speaking Latin America. So this comes from the Taíno language. So thank you so much for watching this video. Hopefully I gave you insight into the indigenous influence in Brujería, espiritismo, and throughout all Latin American culture. But again, this is just a small little tidbit because there are hundreds, if not thousands, of tribes throughout all of the Americas. So hopefully this video has been informative for you to learn about the indigenous influence in Brujería and espiritismo. If you have any more questions, let me know in the comments below and I'll try my best to get back to you. As always, make sure you share these videos so that way the general public can learn more and we can spread education about these different people of color and minorities that are found in Latin America as well. Make sure you follow me on TikTok and Instagram for more informative videos, more educational content about Brujería as well. And also, this YouTube channel has been growing exponentially that I can't even keep up with it. So thank you so much for 400 subscribers. Hopefully in the future, we'll keep up this momentum and the YouTube channel can continue growing. Thank you so much. And in my future videos, I'm going to be talking about the Taíno pantheon, mythology, and espiritismo next. So stay tuned for that. I know a lot of you have been begging me for this, but please be patient with me because I have a lot of references that I need to gather together for you guys in the description, and I have a lot of reading to do, a lot of video editing as well. So thank you so much for your patience. That video is coming up really soon as I can. If you yourself are part of an indigenous tribe, how would you answer the questions about spirituality posed in this video? Let me know in the comments below what are some of your spiritual cultural practices as well. Thanks for watching. Bye!